Hi, welcome to the channel. I'm Carlos, and in this video, we're gonna talk about. I'm gonna talk about what role did it play the end of life law that was enacted in New Mexico, in the state of New Mexico, for Gene Hackman and his wife to choose to live in New Mexico in the first place, given the fact that they had a residence, a house, a beautiful house in California also, and what really went on, I mean, by choosing a place to live, away from the city, from the main, urban area. Um, so let's get into it. So basically, New Mexico is one of those 10 states that allows, that has enacted laws. And I think New Mexico is the one of the last states that has enacted those kind of laws. That it's called End of Life Act law that was enacted in 2021, the year 2021, which has been on now 4 years. And of course, since then, um, many people, of course, in New Mexico. We're not suggesting here that many people move. That's the only reason that people moving from other states to New Mexico. That could be the only reason. Of course, many people nowadays, because of laws that they're strict, like in this is not the case, of course, like abortion case and other law that has been enacted by the federal government or the states, of course, some state individually, in some critical, for the people, for the women's, to the right of, the right of to choose, issue. But this is a different issue, of course. So in New Mexico, of course, one of the last of the 10 states that had enacted this kind of law. Of course, there's some people call it end of life, you know, end of life law, that to help out a patient who was terminally ill. And there are five main, you know, prerequisites to fill in. I mean, it's just not a decision that can be made lightly for the person who, you know, uh, uh, who qualifies in this case. Of course, one of the main issue is that the person has to be um, terminally ill. I mean, terminally ill meaning with a critical, terminally ill person who has a prognosis of 6 months to live. And of course, that's one of the five main reasons or main, points that that makes the patient qualify to be able to, of course, talk to the physician, the doctors who's assisting them, to give them aid to live. But now, when that critical point of giving 6 months to live, or who, even if you give, if a medical professional give 10 months to live, 1 year to live, or 2 years to live, I mean, who can be really sure that you're gonna be living, you're gonna be, have life for another 6 months? Because our lives is all in the hands of God, of course, and God is the one making the choice, you know, uh, choosing. I mean, the day of your destiny. What's gonna be the day that you're gonna be gone from this earth. I mean, you, of course, your soul and your body, right? Body, soul, and spirit. But sometimes it happens, in many times, that a person who's giving 6 months to live, it may live another 5 years, it may live another 2 years, 3 years. We're not talking here about the quality of life, of course. I mean, it could be, even the quality of life, people improve after, even after giving, after that person has been giving 6 months to live or 8 months to live, they ended up living more time than the doctors, have given the prognosis. And of course, some people, go for second medical opinion about different issues, especially in the cancer, with the terminal ill cancer people, that there are second or third opinions about terminal ill patients, in like cancer patients, right? But what happens sometimes is that people improve, and they have more, they live more than what was the diagnosis that took place. What about spiritual healing? What about spiritual healing, meaning that you get your cancer just disappears. And they have so many cases, you know, Christians or not even non-Christians, those people who believe in faith healing, which is which is a which is a different issue, of course. But what about faith healing? Testimonies that we've been hearing for so many years from televangelists. Some televangelists, some of them are really, they recover. They recover from what what the patient was giving. You know, the time that was given to live, like 2 years or 6 months or 6 months. So in this case, of course, there are differences in the end of life act, and of course there are other laws that they call uh, dignity, dying with dignity act, and also the euthanasia. Euthanasia, of course, is very much legal in most of the states of the United States. That there are differences, of course. End of life on euthanasia. Euthanasia is the more extreme case, which is legal in many countries in Europe too. In Europe, these more uh, liberal countries in north of Europe, of course, they have enacted laws. Um, in some cases, people make decisions just because they're tired of living, like or bored to death, like, so ended up having a physician, they apply for the they justify with these laws that was enacted in Europe for so in all these countries. And of course they really they apply, and in most cases they get approval from legal approval with this kind of law. But now what this has to do with Gene Hackman, anyway, going back to the issue of Gene Hackman, his wife passing away in New Mexico not too long ago, a few weeks ago, in which the case, when people make decisions to live in a state like New Mexico or any state, it could be Florida, it could be California or Texas, anywhere, people make plans for life. That's what I'm trying to get to. Now that that we have make a little preview of what does the New Mexico law means for this case. And does this have anything to do with them, with this couple, Gene Hackman and Bessie, to have a plan, to make a choice, to choose New Mexico to live in the last few years. Of course, we know that many years ago they had already they did. In the case of Gene Hackman, he was a legendary actor in Hollywood, and they had made some movies, and that's how he fell in love with New Mexico. That's how he did. I mean, he fell in love many years ago, to after filming movies in Santa Fe area, precisely. So uh, the issue of the last 7 days, when, remember, Betsy that passed away, the wife that had collapsed and died, the November February 11, in which then after that, the following 7 days, Gene Hackman was alive, because of the pacemaker monitoring system that he had attached to him. The last time that was gave signal, the little device, was February 11th, 7 days later. Now, did he take any medication during those 7 days? Think about that. Now, Betsy was the caretaker, the only caretaker known so far of his different illnesses. I mean, Gene Hackman disease, which is Alzheimer's, which is terminally ill disease. By the way, if it is terminally ill disease, Alzheimer's, it could that makes him qualify to to fill the requirement for this law. But of course, we're not suggesting that's what happened there, right? In this case, but those 7 days that in which Gene Hackman didn't take water, didn't take any food, because that's what the report of the chief medical examiner's office, Santa Fe City, New Mexico, says that Gene Hackman didn't take any. There was no sign that he had taken any food during those 7 days. I mean, those previous days before dying, and of course, he had a poor kidney function, which that suggests that he didn't take water for some time also. And of course, we know that for a fact that any human being can live only 7 days without food, without both, like food and water. Any human, any right? Of course, a healthy human being, like a marathon runner, or an athlete, like an NBA athlete or any other, big time big athlete in the states or in the world. I mean, they could. I mean, they of course they have a system that more resistant in system in which they have been healthy and they have been very well taken care. They have taken all kinds of nutrition supplements, and of course they have physicians on duty all the time to take care of them, to the good nutrition and all what they need to be world class athletes. Of course, we're not suggesting that was the Gene Hackman's case. He was 95 years old with illnesses that we know of, that he had Alzheimer and also cardiovascular disease. So, in his condition, of course, those 7 days mark that we're talking about, that you can be alive without no food and water, that could be, instead of 7 days, could be even 5 or 6 days, 5 or 6 days, in which basically you human being in the end of life, any human, right, at different age, of course, uh, in that critical 48 hours before dying, that process of dying, of course. I'm not suggesting that he was in a coma before what happened with Betsy, right? But on those 7 days in which he didn't take, well, three most critical things here. He didn't take his medication. Who gave him medication? Who? Nobody. On those 7 days, Betsy was already dead, like February 11th. Food. He didn't take. There is no evidence that there was, everything was intact. There was no evidence on this scene, which is like a horror movie scene, in which that he fixed any sandwich or anything that he might have taken uh, to any nutritious thing, any nutrition food to stay alive. And of course, water. Water could have, if he fell in the attempt to help Betsy, who was the caretaker, of course, his main caretaker, of course, and in which she was very, of course, protective, and he was very jealous of what Gene Hackman meant for. There is no doubt. There is no doubt that relationship, that loyalty, and that relationship of the instinct of protection. And we know for a fact now that during since October there was Gene Hackman's children or relatives. They were not able to communicate directly with Gene Hackman, apparently, because of course the caretaker, the main caretaker, who was Betsy, she was the one making decisions, personal decisions about Gene Hackman. Well, she was his wife, and of course, I'm sure that in the will, whatever they haven't opened the will, of course, but they already had that the written consent in case. And most elderly married elderly couples make those decisions after 65, 70, or 72 or 75 years old, very early. And some people do it early in life, don't get me wrong. Some people in their 40s. This is not just somebody who's elderly or senior. This is not just for seniors. People make these kinds of decisions in written form, legally done, in which they state clearly, legally, who's going to take, in case of anything happens to one of them, whether at any age, whether there is an age gap, which there was an age gap, of course, of 30 years. I mean, Gene Hackman was 95, Betsy was she just turned 65. So those end of life decisions that people make, prior to getting married, or even after getting married, of course, is very common. It's not like something, well, very unusual. It's very common, and most likely Betsy was very much that she, of course, being the wife, she's the prime time. But of course, if anybody, any of the relatives, the children from, of course, they didn't have children in common. They didn't have kids, this couple. But what about Gene Hackman's previous kids from all of adults, of course, now. They have he had three older children from a previous marriage. They still had the right to, if they desire, right, to be in touch with his father. And some people, criticize people who knew them, the couple, people who knew this couple. They did observe since months ago. We're talking October, November, December. I mean, almost 6 months ago. So almost like 6 months, 6 months or a little more than 6 months, in which they felt, the closest people to this couple felt that Betsy and Gene and Betsy, they were isolated themselves. And the main decision maker of whatever was going on between the couple was Betsy. Of course, she was the one with no Alzheimer's. She didn't have no dementia, but Alzheimer, is very much it's hard for an Alzheimer patient to make decisions. Even in a good physical health condition, because with the doctors, with the Gene Hackman doctors described that for his age and for the cardiovascular and Alzheimer's disease that he had, that of course he was in good fair health. I mean, he was still active. Active meaning what active life means, that he could still go around the city with his wife. He still go shopping and going to maybe movies. I mean, doing to cultural events in the Santa Fe area, even in his own house, right? That he was able to do things around the house independently. Independently meaning, try to fix a sandwich maybe. But during these 6 months, we know for a fact also that Alzheimer, as it goes, as the year progress, and as the illness, remember, there is no cure for that. So the medical community, the scientific community, they're not sure exactly what why after somebody was diagnosed with Alzheimer. Why? By the way, my father, I knew for this fact too, because my father had Alzheimer in his last 3 years, which he didn't have that diagnosis before. But as the first year, he was still able to do things. I mean, he was very much going to the bank, go to the ATM, do his shopping on his own, close his door. I mean, at the end of the day, turn off the TV. He was still able to the first year, but the second year, he really started deteriorating faster than the first year. The first year is very much, even after the diagnosis, the first year typically, normally is more, able to manage with medication, of course, that medication just helps, but doesn't cure the illnesses, right? So the disease doesn't cure. There's no cure for the disease. So for a fact, I know my dad, my dad was a good example of that. But at the end, the last 6 months, the last year, I would say, in the case of my father, right? It was so fast. I mean, he was diminished. He was just dying alive, basically. Dying alive meaning he was just very anxious, very much, he couldn't control himself. He couldn't control what he was saying, things that he was very confused all the time. I mean, if in Gene Hackman's case, of course, people who saw them months earlier, still walking and strolling, getting coffee from a coffee shop, he was by himself, actually. Maybe the wife was nearby, of course, but on that video, it shows that he wasn't by himself, of course. He was just walking with a cup of coffee that seemed to be coffee from a coffee place that he bought, and of course there was the takeout, something that he bought for takeout. He was still able to pay, right? Get change, hopefully exact change from from wherever he bought his item, right? But so the idea that well, he was very much normal there, but the following six months could have been critical. In which people who knew him in the Santa Fe didn't see him that much anymore after that. Of that video from months earlier. So that suggests that he was really deteriorating faster than anything else. So in case of that, what about this end of life law that was enacted in New Mexico? And of course, they were smart people. I mean, very much. Betsy was very much, very much aware of this law, of course, and well, the physicians, they haven't said anything about that yet. But one of the second requirement, well, I gave you two requirements. Another third requirement is that the person who fill out and request the end of life law to be applied to him or her, if it's female or male, of course, needs to be aware of what he's doing. Basically, if he signs, a request requesting that he is able to still make a decision by himself. Was he able to make a decision for himself? Well, without no doubt. I mean, if Alzheimer makes you deteriorate so fast, I mean, in the last few months, that could be, so he wasn't qualified, of course, to sign any of those, to sign a request like that. So this law could apply to him. Of course, all the medication that we know about that was spilled on the bathroom floor, that Betsy was trying to reach in order to, perhaps was for her, and of course she was the one most likely giving medication to her husband, in this case Gene Hackman, right? So those 7 days he didn't have no medication because Betsy was dead. He couldn't reach where Betsy was already dead, the corpse, where she was laying, decomp, very much dead for those 7 days. He was a little far away, but of course he was able to see what was going on. I mean, even with an Alzheimer's situation like that, he was able to see what is going on. I mean, he didn't die. He couldn't get up, but he could see. He could turn. He was able to turn his head, of course, and look, to see where Betsy was. Of course, there's no doubt about it. His cane was nearby, and his eyeglasses was nearby. He couldn't reach none of those. If he couldn't reach those items that are critical and necessary for him, of course, how he could have got up and look for help and look, and in the meantime, all his, that was, I'm talking about so much about the loyalty of having pets, right? Especially dogs. Dogs are so loyal. I mean, think about Xena, the Australian Kelpie that was, of course, he was in a cage. He was not able to help in any way, besides just bark of hunger. Of course, he was, this pet was not eating anything anyway for those days. So the pet also, this dog died of hunger. But the other two pets, the German Shepherd and the German Shepherd mix, and I always make the difference between these two dogs. They have different personalities. They're both German Shepherd, right? But the other one was mixed. If you're mixed, of course there's a different person, the breed changed a little bit. So they have different personality, but they both have that sense of loyalty. I mean, loyalty was one of the most beautiful things about having a pet. These pets were family to them, and of course they were in and out, and they were trying to, like I have my little puppy here, Charles I would call it, which is French breed. What this puppy does? Goes to when somebody rings the bell, goes to the door, the gate, and goes and start barking and come back and start barking to me, just letting me know that somebody's at the door. So, dogs are very smart. They can talk, of course, but they're very smart. So if that's the same case for these German Shepherds, who are smart dogs, loyal, and they have an instinctive of to protect their master, to protect their basically the family members. They're all family, all together. So with that kind of instinct, of course, they were in and out of the house, in and out. They had as we assuming there was a door because they were in, and the door of the house was halfway open, which suggests that they were in and out. And of course, these dogs were, the only thing they were drinking was water and whatever the food they can find in the premises of the house, anywhere they could find anything to eat, even grass. Sometimes food, if there is no food, of course, they could find anything on the yard. Like, what about vegetables? If there's a vegetable garden, tomatoes, I mean, they could grab anything that smells, even fruits, in the garden area, wherever they can reach to get something tasty to eat, of course, and worms. Why not? They can find worms, which is meat. In a way, it's meat, like worms in the garden area, and anything they could find to eat. You know, in cases they chase rats. I mean, mouses on the yard, anything they can find, rabbits. Remember, this is a they have a big yard, 12 acre, 12 acre, uh, compound when where there were grasses. I mean, there were areas, green areas, where of course why not rabbits and different kind of little animals they could chase of hunger. The instinct of survival is amazing for dogs too. They are not hunting dogs. I have some experiences with having hunting dogs with my grandma who had a farm, and she had used to have like six dogs, hunting dogs. There was hunting dogs, but out of hunger, of course, they could have tried to eat something from the premises. I mean, get like a rabbit, get something to eat, of course, anything meat, right? And water they could have done survive with the water of the toilet. So going back to the issue of this law, that of course we're not suggesting that they had done that, but without with not having any medication to take by mouth for Gene Hackman, that could have been an issue, maybe that issue in which they have thought about it, and of course choosing New Mexico to live, which is one of the states. Of course, California, they had a home in California too. They still have the house is still there. Of course, now with the testament and the will, that was going to be the war for that will. Before there was so much quietness, so much isolation. They with the relatives, especially the children. Apparently, there was not too much communication. They were isolated themselves. But now that the will, everybody's come to the table to see what's going to take place. I mean, it's millions of dollars in play here. But that's going to be next war. I mean, next thing in social media and in TV news media too. What's going to be for each one of the person? It's just going to be crazy, really. I mean, it's going to be crazy. But anyway, so it was a tragedy. The whole thing is a tragedy, and we're still living, through going analyzing the whole aspect of laws regarding end of life law, and many seniors. We're not suggesting everybody, but some seniors, some I would say, not the majority. People, in the last tour after when they retire, most retirees, they choose. I want to be clear on that. How to live the best days of their lives. They're not picking one state to live. How they're gonna die on that state and what law is required. Of course, they do research. I mean, everybody does it. Research about what law is for certain issues, taxes, and what the weather. I mean, but laws regarding end of life law, of course, people makes all. But that's not the main issue of why people are retiring in certain states, like New Mexico, for instance. So, guys, that's the issue that we bring in this today to the table, and so thanks for watching, and let the conversation going. And well, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, and if you like the content, please give us thumbs up, and see you in the next video. Take care, guys. So long. Take care. Bye bye.